Greetings, this is the Questing GM. So I'm back with another Quickstarter video, and I'm not sure if I actually told anyone what was the next Quickstart I was going to run, whether on my Twitter or my Instagram. Well, that's what this video is for. So my last Quickstarter video, I was talking about my experiences with the modern age system. And although that one may not come out as a very nice video for whoever my experiences with the modern age 3-4 quick start, but it did end on a positive note in the sense that it actually made my group more interested in trying more age system games. So so that was basically the catalyst, you could say, for this choice for this month's for this video's Quickstarter, which was actually followed by the Expanse role-playing game Quickstart. So for the uninitiated like myself, the Expanse is actually a series of novels, space sci-fi novels, that has been licensed by Green Ronin Publishing, who got the rights to make a RPG for this series of novels. And it's basically you could say in a general terms that this is just something about a bit more of a serious sci-fi where they try to get the science right, but Earth and basically humanity has expanded into the stars within the solar system, mainly within the solar system, because they have perfected certain, I believe it's the Epstein drive to colonize planets. Most importantly was Mars. So there's actually a Mars government. There's a new Mars government that has been formed, and then there's the Earth government, who is formed by the United Nations, and then in between you have a group of several generations of humans who have lived on the asteroid belts, and also some of the smaller planets. And so therefore, basically it's an intriguing political setting in terms of the space genre. Humanity has divided itself into factions, and they are wiggling them among themselves to get a certain political edge. And there is always there's a Cold War tension within the setting at the start of the setting, and that eventually can escalate. That actually eventually escalates into a full minor skirmishes, and then there is the introduction of certain alien elements that comes in and sort of jeopardizes the entire balance of all three factions and humanity as a whole. Uh, and of course, if you've heard of The Expanse, I think the most popular iteration of The Expanse property right now is the television series, which will be getting a 4th season very soon. But an important thing to note is actually that this particular rendition of the Expanse role-playing game is based on the novels itself, the source material itself, rather than the television series. And why this is a important nuance, or at least a nuance that has to be addressed, is the fact that some of the events that the setting is assuming in the role-playing game is based on the novels, which may not be similar to what is happening in the television series. And in some cases there were some NPCs or some of the characters that were in the Expanse novels but did not make an appearance in the television series as of yet, or maybe never. So that's the basic introduction of why I wanted to run. My group wanted to play the Expanse role-playing game, and it's actually there's really in terms of getting familiar with the system, it's not too difficult because of our prior experience with Modern Age. But there's still some things to talk about in the difference between this quick start and the Modern Age quick start, which hopefully we'll get to cover all of that in this video. So let's just start with a simple breakdown of what this quick start is. So this quick start is altogether 42, I believe it's 42 pages long. 42 pages long in the PDF form. So there's also altogether 42 pages. It's generally split into 3 sections. You would have the rules section. You would then followed by the adventure, the quick start adventure that comes with it, and then you have the pre-gen characters at the back of the book. So that's a fairly good amount. I mean, that's a fairly good amount of page count to cover all three sections. So let's just try to find and see who is responsible for making this quick start. If I can just flip into the credits page, right. So the credits page that we have here, that would be on page 27 of the actual quick start itself before we actually get into the adventure. So the Expanse created by James S.M. Corey. Design and development is done by Steve Kenson, editing by Josh Vogt, proofreading by Samantha Chapman, and then you have graphic design and art direction by Hal Mango. The front cover art is done by Victor Leza Moreno, back cover art done by Biagio de Alessandro and Ferdinand de Ladera, with interior art done by a whole splattering of artists, and not forgetting publisher by Chris Paramus, who basically owns Groening Publishing. So what do we have, or what do we see when you open up this 42-page quick start? Interestingly, this is one quick start which uses a single column full-on layout, and maybe I'll just try to flip a random page here, which is uniquely different from previous quick starts who tend to use a two-column sort of layout, and while while a two-column layout may be so-called the industrial standard, or at least that's the usual layout that I see in most quick starts and even in most games. It's interesting for them to go for this layout. It actually does allows the fonts to be a little bit bigger. Sections, and sections can take up entire pages, and it does contribute to the amount of space that the page number takes. 42 pages. If it was done in a double column layout, it would probably have taken a lot less pages. But nevertheless, I still think that they still did it's an interesting experiment. I think it's harder to read a single page layout on a PDF, but once it's printed out, it actually makes reading a lot much easier. So it's not something that I wouldn't see myself getting familiar with or used to. But of course, the consideration of how much space is being used is definitely one that may be a concern for some people, or in certain cases, I believe. But in any case, so what is the core mechanic? What's the core mechanics that's been introduced in the quick start version of these rules? So, like I said, if you're familiar with the age system already, as we are, or as my group was, and we are, it's the similar 3d6, with one of them being the special dice, which in this case I think it's called the drama die. Yes, it's called the drama die rather than I think similar to what the modern age call it. So they have the 3d6 with a drama die with a plus if your character has a certain focus there's usable within that skill check, and then you beat a target number, and that's the simple thing. And that's your basic simple test, and then you fall into places like there's the oppose test, which is when two individuals have to make the same separate simple test, and then have to compare the results. And then you have the advanced test, where it's basically a simple test, but the result on the drama die is added to a running count that has to reach a certain success threshold, and therefore that particular skill or that particular task is completed. And then following on, we have the combat encounters, which is very similar to what's in modern age. You have the way of determining initiative and actions. You have major and minor actions, how you perform melee and range attacks. The thing where things starts to differ here in the Expanse compared to modern age is the health system, so to speak. But in the Expanse, it's not called health; it's actually called fortune, and you actually have to sort of deduct when you take damage after reducing it from your toughness, whether by armor or natural toughness. you actually can spend fortune to sort of deduct the damage that is being taken. Now, if in any kind of situation when there is additional damage that has been dealt, or there's any remaining damage after all the reductions, then the PCs will enter into a state of a condition. Now, this is you could say that this is a much more abstract or much more complicated version of a 0 hit points, but I kind of see. But when the PC decides to take a condition, they can actually sort of choose what condition they want to take. So in the quick start here, what's given is the injured, wounded, unconscious, and dying conditions. So if you take normally you would take the injured condition, because by taking the injured condition you are given a -1 to all your ability checks. You can't run, and if you take further damage and you can't reduce that, then you would move on to wounded, and then after wounded you go into either unconscious or after wounded you will go into dying. So that actually makes combat a little bit more deadlier compared to modern age. And then the other thing is that at least in the quick start, and I believe the full explanation is given in the full rules, but in the quick start there are no means of actually restoring your fortune, much unlike in modern age where you could actually use some sort of first aid action or something like that to regain some health points. But the assumption is that fortune is supposed to is more of representing your luck, and once you've run out of luck, you just take that single hit and it deals you damage. So that's actually a very interesting approach or assumption to go with, and sort of puts a certain level of deadliness to the combat. Although we didn't really get to experience that during the running of the quick start adventure itself. So it would have been interesting, but I think it would have felt a bit more. It would have been a better approach or a fuller approach if we knew what was the healing rules in the Expanse was going to be like. And then naturally there is the stun system, which is the thing that always makes the age system unique. And they have the similar combat stunts, social exploration stunts, exploration stunts, and social stunts. Even the same names, and also the same effects. And you can always perform stunts once you have the proper relationships with the that's found in the character sheet. So generally nothing very new in terms of learning the system. If you're familiar with the age system in general, it's pretty much just using the same mechanics onto a new skin or onto a new setting. So yeah, that's I guess that's basically how every age system game from now on would look like. Although that may be something I'll have something to comment on when I reach my final conclusions about the quick start. So generally, just the rules section itself takes up to about 12 pages, just 12 pages out of 42. So that actually puts a huge remainder on the actual adventure itself. And the quick start adventure that we have is called Cupbearer. So generally, it's just it's about the crew or the PCs being hired by a corporation to find their heir who has sort of ran off from home, and to find out where he is, and actually to bring him back with a very significant amount of payment. And as the PCs investigate on a Ganymede station, which is actually one of the significant places within the Expanse setting, they will actually find out what happened to the heir, and the relationship he's made while he was a Ganymede, and where he is, and how they had to negotiate for his return. And this is actually where I'll start to come in and talk about the quick start adventure in itself. And unlike what my opinions were about the modern age quick start adventure that came with it, I felt that Cupbearer is actually a very good demonstration, I would say, at least a very good demonstration attempt of tying system together with setting. So the Cupbearer adventure is what I would say is a very solid introduction adventure for what it does and how it introduces the system. And there are actually a few things that I would like to point out, within how the adventure was written that hopefully would inform or give good feedback to whoever is designing future adventures or future quick starts for the age system, at least within Green Rolling Publishing. Not that they would care to listen, but hopefully the word gets out there. So the introduction it starts off with the introduction, which is just a very brief of what's happening. But the one section that I really appreciated was actually pretty much in the beginning. You have the theme. There's a theme section here, and this is actually something that's really, really helpful, I think, for someone as a GM who's trying to prep for the adventure and trying to get a gist of not only what's happening, but what kind of directions the GM should be taking it about. And this is actually a much more helpful tool for GMs like myself to be more flexible with in reaction to what the players are doing. And in here, it says right here, Cupbearer is about relationships and the things people do to find them, sustain them, and end them, and the way they drive others to take action. And that's actually a very good gist of the adventure in itself, because as the PCs arrive on Ganymede Station and start doing their investigations, the factions that they can meet to find the heir can be really anyone, and it can really be any and different factions would have their different interests, and then they would therefore negotiate for different things and different things that they want out with the same goal of finding the heir. So by providing, this is something that I don't even think it's not something that should be limited to quick starts. Even published adventures like Battle by Dungeons and Dragons, or they should have a theme section, at least to give an idea of what the adventure is really about, in a sense, and therefore it puts a lens on the GM to sort of prepare towards that direction for the adventure and reading the rest of the adventure through that lens. And one other thing is that I also appreciated was this other section is called the sequence of events. A sequence of events basically gives you a rundown of what is going to happen, a timeline of the events of what's going to happen if the PCs did not interfere, and therefore it gives sort of the building blocks or the moving blocks that if the PCs did something in a certain part of the timeline, then the GM will know how this would affect the rest of the timeline, and therefore they could just it's easier to adjust and with the knowledge of what's supposed to happen in sequence. Rather than them doing something and then the GM having to reconfigure everything at the back of their head. So these are just very simple tools that in terms of I think it's just good practice for adventure writing, and I mean, kudos to whoever in Green Rolling really thought this up and thought that this would be valuable, because it is valuable for GMs like that. And I would definitely like to see more writers, more designers pick up something like this and apply it to whether they are writing for adventures for quick starts or even a full-on published adventure. And then we get on into the main adventure in itself. The other one good thing that the adventure does is that it also references the systems that was being told explained. So you have basic ideas like in the first scene, they say that you can introduce the investigation mechanics, and then in the second scenes and the social scenes, you can introduce the social mechanics, and then when they move on to going to the docks where the heir is supposed to be, you can use the exploration mechanics, and it's all generally pretty much well flow, and they tell you what sort of mechanics to use. So that's generally, for me, it's all very, 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 very solid, consistent work, and taking the GM by the hand to sort of tell you what's going on and what's happening. And I wouldn't say that prepping for Cupbearer wasn't without its challenges. there were some scenes where I felt that it could have been split into different in its own separate sections, like especially once you get introduced to some of the factions along the way. All the factions interactions are all put together in the same scene, which I felt that if they were split into different scenes, then it might have made things a bit easier to visualize and organize. And one other thing that's missing also in the adventure itself is that there are basically no maps of any kind given, although they sort of like tell you where things are in the station. So it can make combat a little bit challenging if you haven't really thought out of the location of where they take place, or where the negotiations take place. But generally, I would say, like, in terms of its writing, it's pretty solid. I don't there weren't a lot of plot holes, you could say. Even when I ran it through my players, they found things pretty much logical, and therefore, the adventure doesn't crumble on its own weight. And everyone just doesn't have the suspension of disbelief is lost just because the adventure itself doesn't really make any sense. So that's the adventure in itself. So like, if you've been following me on this series of videos, you know that my biggest complaint, especially for Quickstart, has always been the adventure, and it's really refreshing to see that. I was really disappointed with how the 3-4 Quickstart adventure came out to be, and I was really hoping that this would not be the standard for the entire whatever Green Ronin Publishing comes out with. But it's really assuring to see that this is not happening within the Expanse, and I hope there is some sort of cross-pollination between the design teams to learn from each other, and make it a more standard or consistent template for future products that if that Green Ronin comes out with. I don't know if they have any upcoming products or upcoming licensed properties that they have right now, but if there's any one Quickstart I hope they would stick closer to, would definitely be the Expanse, especially when it's a licensed property, for someone who has no knowledge about it, and having that theme section really just helped out. And then lastly, we have the pre-gens. So the pre-gens are not too complicated, and thankfully, like every quick start, they always have a small section dedicated just to explain what the character sheet is supposed to look like. But one thing that I did like in terms of production value was how the pre-gens they set out was they gave gave one page fully and about the background description, which is some could generally feel that it's a waste of space to have so much text dedicated to just non-mechanical related or character sheet related information, but it was a very interesting way to immerse my players. I mean, it was easier for them to immerse into the characters that they picked, which I've let them keep the character sheets, rather than how it was in Modern Age. And I think Modern Age would actually have benefited a lot more if they had like this sort of formatting for their character sheets, because that setting needed a lot more explanation about what other factions are, and how are they related and how are they tied with. So definitely something to consider, and and if given the Quickstart is already a single column, and they have still spending page counts on making these kind of things, I would say like it's a good trade-off in terms of like it doesn't significantly increase the page count, but it still increases the value of the product as a whole. And the character sheet itself is not too difficult to read. In fact, I actually kind of like, this is actually one demonstration of where they use a double column layout, but I actually kind of like how they did this design for the character sheet, in the sense that all the ability scores, the main ability scores, are all on one side, and then the combat related and the miscellaneous stats are all on the other side. So it does make things a bit easier to find and read. Although maybe the minor complaint here is that there's no equipment section, but the one thing is that the Quickstart itself also doesn't really have a lot of doesn't have that equipment table like you would have in Modern Age and in some of the other Quickstarts that I've been reading from them lately. So that's generally about it. I mean, if there were any real complaints that I could have about the Expanse Quickstart, it's a lack of tables, which is, you know, Modern Age had some tables that were quite redundant and useless, but I would say like not having them, not having all of them at least, was also a little bit challenging in the Expanse Quickstart. I think one particular table that I would have really appreciated is the just the basic adjudication table of what are the kind of general target numbers for certain tasks, with the range of 7 to 12 or something like that. Although most of that has already been covered in the adventure in itself, so that doesn't pose too much of a problem. But however, it's still good to have a guideline at least for GMs to know what sort of numbers they should impose on the PCs when they want to perform a check that is not stated in the Quickstart adventure. So all in all, I would say in terms of a product and in terms of my experience with the Expanse has mostly been positive. Like I said, there were some challenges in preparing for the adventure, trying to draw the mind maps out and trying to make sure that I got everyone's motivations right down, and the fact that I had to know everyone's motivations ahead of time did take a bit of time to wrap my head around. But generally, I would say, this is a good introduction product. This is a good quick start and as to a system as well as to a setting, because they have this great introduction to they have this great page on introduction about the setting itself, so you kind of really get the gist of what the setting is really about. And I guess another minor complaint is that there were some NPCs, some of the pre-gens here, especially the one who's a pilot and who's a medic, didn't really get a chance to shine within the adventure itself because because the supplementary rules for them are not within the quick start. So it was actually kind of dangerous when my players wanted to play one of them, and I had to tell them that, okay, you are playing as a medic, but there are actually nothing in the quick start here that actually has any kind of healing rules. So you may not be as useful as you think you are. But that's not a real downside in a sense that because this quick start is still built to be a tie-in with the main rules. So you can actually, even though you have the main rules already, you can still use the adventure that comes with it, and they even give you suggestions about how to tie in with the adventures that comes in the full rules, or how to use this as a springing board to the adventures in the full rules. So all in all, I say this is a good job, and definitely a very positive experience after coming out from the Modern Age disappointment. So Green Ronin, if you are listening, if you are watching this for whatever reason, I would say, take this as your benchmark, as your exemplary quick start of making a customer happy and interested in running more of the Expanse and the quick start, which is probably where I want to wrap up this video. So does this quick start convince me to play more of the Expanse? Do I want to get the full rules of this and play with my group? Oddly enough, I would have to be very honest, I didn't think that the age system was a good fit with the setting of the Expanse. I felt that maybe a much more grittier, a bit more on the darker side of rule set would fit the Expanse better, and actually have one other system in mind that I think I would try to run within the Expanse system. But if this was going to be like a benchmark for some sort of like sci-fi age system, or treating this as a introduction to the age system, I would say this one has done the job. I would look on the age system more favorably because of the Expanse, a role-playing RPG, even though I may not choose to or decide to run particularly in the Expanse, which leads me to my conclusion is that after playing this, my next Quickstarter game is also going to be in the age system, not the Expanse, not Modern Age. So I guess that kind of leaves you with only like two options, or you could say just one option left in the whole age system line, and you probably can guess what it is. But the biggest hint that I can give you that it will be the granddaddy of the age system as a whole. So I guess that one pretty much gives it away. So I guess that'll be all for tonight for the expense system. Once again, if I haven't said it enough, I would say kudos to whoever's behind the expense quick start. You've done a great job of salvaging or saving my impressions about the age system as a whole. And hopefully my next quick start with the next age system game would just cement my love for the age system and finally decide to buy or invest into one of the age system games. So there, the Expanse Quick Start. I hope you find this video useful if you are on the edge about finding out more, or not sure if it's a good game to fit. If it's a game that you want to get into. But yeah, I mean it's a free quick start. You can find it on Drive-Thru RPG. I'll put the links in the descriptions. And if there's something that really showcases the age system, at least the Expanse role-playing game, quick start, the way to go. All right, so that'll be all for me for tonight, and this is the Questing GM signing out for now, and I'll see you in the next Quickstarter video. Bye.